So what is a process basically? So the process is a series of actions or steps taken in order to achieve a particular end. So whenever we are working in any particular IT project, we are surrounded by n number of processes. For example, if you are working on a particular domain, let's say banking domain or a retail banking project to be more specific, there are different processes which you have to deal with, right from where the customer is coming, gathering the customer information, and then addressing the customer's concern. So all of these are sub-processes around a particular domain. So process mining basically deals to address these concerns arising out of process modeling activities. So I would consider process mining as one of the subset of process modeling. Now, process mining is a process management technique that allows for the analysis of business processes based on event logs. Now, when we are working as a business analyst, we always tend to do some high-level process modeling. But then there are certain hidden processes which are not at all visible when we see it from a broader perspective. So in order to address that challenge, we need to perform process mining activities. Now, since these processes are not that easy to recognize, it's advised that we investigate certain artifacts or certain events. So those events are typically the event logs, which are captured within a particular software application. So every application would be having a tracing module or an event log module, wherein we would be able to identify what all processes are going well, what all processes has some issues, and what all processes could be rectified. So once we have identified what all processes having some issues, so we tend to discover more about it, like what made that process to fail or what are the corrective action. So these all things would be the scope of process modeling activity. So how do we solve a problem when we are performing a process modeling? So these are the typical steps when you are solving a process problem. So the first step says identify the issues. Be clear about what the problem is. Now once you have gone through the event log or the logs which clearly indicates what made the process fail, so you would be able to clearly distinguish between what made that process, I would say what made that process to fail. So we have to identify those issues in and around the process areas. Second step says understand everyone's interest. Now there would be a set of processes which are end user specific. Then there would be processes which are customer specific. Then there would be processes which are important from a business stakeholder perspective. So we need to clearly understand which all processes we need to consider as our scope of work or prioritize when it comes to doing process mining activity. So we cannot go and rectify each and every processes. There has to be some significant valid justification why we are actually heading towards correcting a particular process. So it's very important for us to understand everyone's interest, whether they are willing to correct that process or not. So let's say there are 10 different stakeholders in a particular project. Out of them, 5 are not in favor of correcting a process and rest 5 are interested. So this is a mixed approach. So some people, 50% are interested in correcting the process and 50% are not interested in correcting the process. In that case, we would go for a formal voting wherein we would able to understand what all are the perspective of each stakeholders. Or if the voting comes or majority of vote comes in the favor of correcting the process, then we will definitely do the needful. Else we would not engage our scope in rectifying those processes. Third step says about list the possible solutions. So once we have identified, once we have understood the interest of the particular stakeholders, we would list down the possible solution. Possible solution as in by what ways we could improve the processes. So this all talks about what are the various areas, what are the various options that we have when we consider rectifying a particular processes. So there would be a different set of steps to execute a process. Let's say process 1 or option 1 could be executed in 3 steps. Option 2 could be executed in 5 steps. Option 3 could be executed in 10 steps. Definitely we would choose option 1, which could be executed in 3 steps. But we would also be considering the time, the effort, and the costing of those. If in cost wise the third option is a better opportunity, then we would go with the third option. Next step talks about the evaluation of the option. So once we are fine with the 3 options, we would evaluate each of this option and we would finalize one best option. Fifth step talks about selecting an option or options. There could be a situation wherein you are not supposed to finalize one option. You could have multiple options to deal with. So in that case, we would be selecting multiple options. Next step is document the agreement. So once we are done with our initial level of analysis, we have to formally document those findings in a particular document. Now this document could be in a process flow if I talk about the process modeling part. Then it could be a workflow kind of document wherein we would be highlighting within a particular workflow what all processes are there, who all are the possible end users who would be interacting with those processes. We would be documenting them. Once we have achieved that level of agreement in terms of documentation, we would move to the 7th step, that is agreeing on contingencies, monitoring and evaluation. So once we are good to go with the implementation of the process, maybe at a workflow level, so we'll have to constantly monitor the progress of the change or whether the change is deriving necessary value to the customers or not. That is something we would be doing. So how we would start with? So those were the steps. Now there are different approaches from which we could solve the process mining problem. So the first approach is the perception driven. So here we would be doing as is analysis, wherein we would be understanding the current state via a as is process model. After we have completed our analysis on as is model, we would move towards interviewing the stakeholder in order to understand their perspective in and around rectifying a particular process. After we have done that, we would do some document analysis, like reviewing the existing processes or reviewing the existing workflow documents, activities of those nature. Once we have done that, we would be doing process modeling, maybe through a diagrammatic tool like Visio or Glyphy or Bizachi modeler or Lucid chart. We would be using those kind of tool to model these processes. Once we have done that, we would be getting some output, like we would be having a process model which is completely based on perceptions of the stakeholders. So when I say perception, so the perception are the viewpoint of the stakeholders. Based on the interview feedback, we have modeled our processes. Now once we are done that, we need to understand certain constraints, like only manual processes can be modeled. We cannot model the automated processes from a perceptions driven approach. So perception driven approaches are only ideal when the processes are manual. Now what we would do if a process is automated? For that we have the second approach, which is data driven. Here what we would do is we would get our hands on the system and event logs. Like I said, event log is a specific area within the software application wherein all your events are maintained, like what all processes were successful, what all processes were failed, and what all processes are incomplete. So we would have our hands on those event log and we would try to understand how we could rectify those processes or how we could re-engineer those processes. Now once we are done that, we would go on and identify the real facts, which is an evidence of what happened in real. So this event logs are something which is not manual in nature. These are the real-time facts and evidences, like why the processes fail, where the gap is. It would give a more concrete picture about what all processes needs to be rectified with immediate effect. That's a very good part when it comes to going forward with the data-driven approach. Next we would be doing is process modeling, that is data driven, not perception driven like the earlier. So the output here would be the process model based on the real data. So I would stress on the word real data over here. So that is a good part of this process mining. So again we would be using diagrammatic tool like Visio, Glyphy, Bishaji or Lucidchart to capture this business processes. So the constraint here is only automated process can be modeled here. So like earlier approach, we cannot model the perception driven processes. Now third approach is when we combine approach 1 and 2. So the final outcome what we get here is, it's an outcome of both the approaches. We see a refined SS model. So when we combine the automated processes and manual processes together with different approaches, we get a final outcome, which is a much more mature version of processes. So this is how we do process mining practically. Now these are the 3 steps, I would say, in order to discover conformance and enhance the particular process in a process mining technique. First, we would discover the existing process, maybe in document analysis or through the event log that we get from a particular system. Once we have discovered the process, we would confirm the results of the existing process. So how can we confirm the results with the existing process? Maybe we could do some document analysis of as-is model which is already in place. Maybe we could get the viewpoint of the different stakeholders. We could interview them. We could conduct some focus group session, some brainstorming session with them, and we would be able to confirm the existing process. So when we say confirm the existing processes, so we are basically confirming the results of the processes. What's the outcome that was there in the existing processes? Now once we have identified that, we would further move towards enhancing the existing processes. That is where we are actually doing our work. So once we have discovered the processes, we confirm the processes with the respective stakeholder, we would further go ahead and enhance the existing processes. That would be your to-be modeling part. So this is how process modeling is a very good technique for a business analyst, which they could use in terms of refining the existing processes and create a better to-be model. So that's all. If we summarize the overall aspect of this particular process mining technique, so it states that process mining can provide useful insights that facilitate improvement in processes performance. The deficiencies of interview and workshop-based process discovery can be overcome. In the case of audits, process mining can be used to identify non-conformance. Process mining can be very effectively used to improve and enhance organizational processes. So whenever a particular audit happens in a particular organization, we tend to identify whether there are some gaps within the regulatory processes. So regulatory processes are very important. Any issues with the regulatory processes would directly impact the product and the business stakeholders. So we need to be very careful when we are applying this technique of process mining in regulatory processes.